donors, if we want to understand this thing, right, we need to make all these kinds of assumptions. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Elise Macamo, for this co-statement. It's also very much to the point. I think we have a broad array of opinions to maybe you want to react first, Joe?
Just three very quick comments. I mean, first, of course, it was, you know, I've written a set of books which are much more nuanced, so this is trying to squeeze it into a simplistic 20 minutes. But first of all, we all make decisions according to the rules that are existing. So when I drive faster in Germany than I do in England, because the speed limits are higher in Germany than they are in England. So this is a very simple kind of thing if you follow the rules. I would argue that the donors are setting the rules. The second thing I want to point out is that, yes, of course, the donors are divided. Trying to herd donors is like herding cats. Okay. Nonetheless, what was interesting about 2001 and 2002 was the degree to which the donors were coherent. It was the entire donor group that agreed to give Mozambique, decided to give Mozambique more money than it asked. It was the entire donor group that rejected the civil society plea to attack corruption. So we have a donor consistency here which is unusual at that point. And that's important because it's just 2 years before Guebuza becomes president. But the other thing is, there is not one capitalism. The Asian tigers were very different from the Swedes, are very different from the Americans. And if you read any of Ha-Joon Chang's books, he looks a lot at these differences within capitalism. So we're looking at a very specific model of capitalism which was being promoted by the World Bank and the IMF at the end of the 1980s and the early 1990s. This is not the only capitalism. And indeed, the target of what they were doing was to say, we do not want you to follow the model of the Asian tigers. And so it was a choice within capitalisms.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Yeah. A choice within capitalism. Yeah. Let's open the discussion. Maybe we take some questions together.
I would like, Mr. Hanlon, if you could elaborate a bit more on the question. You said that actually there is a sort of a takeover of the resources to this, what Mr. Jürgen, had told us that by 2020 there is going to be actually a full shift of property rights to outside actors, let's say it very generally.
Mm-hmm. Yes, please.
I will make a very brief comparison with the colonial era, just to simply deconstruct the points that were made by the discussion. One, the thing that there is conflict between the donors doesn't say much. There was imperial conflict, of course, in the 19th century, in the scramble for Africa, when they divided Africa. We almost all agree, I think, besides the guy who published in Third World Quarterly The Case for Colonialism, all the rest of the scholars agree that it was more or less extractive system. And they had great conflict if Portugal wanted to take the whole zone from Mozambique to Angola, and Britain didn't want to, and Britain was more powerful, so we have this map instead of another map in front of us. And the second point, that the problem of agency, like the freedom to decide, etc., I think, yeah, it was anyway responded by the decision making within a set system of rules and institutions. And also, if individuals intended to do well, they had a genuine commitment. This is true also for colonials. Colonials were not violent, evil guys who never wanted development in Africa, but they saw development in a very specific way and imposed from above without any freedom of decision making. So yeah, just two brief points.
Thank you.
Up to now.
There was one more point over there, yes?
Yeah.
Maybe if you can be, please, be
Okay.
relatively short,
My question is
because we are in the
on
last
indigenous. From the history of Africa, all the institutions that you explained, they have led Africa into crisis. So, the time Lumumba on Nkrumah, and as well as Gaddafi, as well as Sankara, if they would have been allowed to survive on perform their dreams, could this crisis would have been there? What would you
Okay, let's run this back to front. With the demise of Robert Mugabe currently, if Mugabe had retired after 10 years, he would have been, with all the problems, he would have been created as called one of the heroes of Africa, like Nkrumah and Nyerere and so on. By not quitting at 10 years, he became a dictator. And I think there are very few people, very few leaders anywhere in the world, my own country included, who were any good after 10 years. And I think that the thing that one has to think about is how do we create transitions? And I often point to Mexico, which has been a predominant party state for most of its history. And they have a 7-year limit on everything. All terms are 6 years or 7 years, I can't remember which. No one can serve more than one term in any post, whether it's party post or political post, forcing turnover, forcing renewal. And I think one of the things we think about is how do we, within our political systems, force renewal? And this applies as much in Britain as it does in Mozambique. We have a set of people now in Mozambique who were just around too long. Okay. On colonialism, I agree absolutely, completely. So nothing to say on that. On resources, you have the coal and tet is controlled by the Brazilians and the Indians now. The gas is controlled, the gas in the north is controlled by a large consortium which includes Americans, Thai, Indians, Chinese, Italians. The gemstones are controlled mostly by Gemfields of South Africa, Gemfields, which is now controlled by a hedge fund. Titanium is Chinese, Irish. Southern gas is South African. You go through the list of resources, and those are the top 10. Oh, aluminium is, I don't even know who owns the aluminium now. So you go through the resource list, and you have to go all the way down to electricity, which is about the 6th or 7th export before you get a Mozambican company, and that's state controlled. So, you know, 80% of Mozambique's exports, for instance, are controlled by transnational corporations.
Yeah. Maybe we have one more round.
I have one question. Thank you very much for all these explanations. But where are the weak spots of those crooks, northern crooks, southern crooks? Give us some kind of entry point to intervene, to somehow where can we start the political debate and not continue so much maybe on an academic level, or even like disappearing into some kind of cynicism?
Yes, it's about, as a Swiss citizen, I'm interested in the Swiss bank, that's my bank, as you told me. So it's about the responsibility. Do you know about this 500 million loan? Is it Credit Suisse money, or is it organized by Credit Suisse that they might blame other banks who provided this credit?
Yes, for me, the question which is now a little bit in this, also the doubts and the question raised on this narrative we developed, and we have a clear picture. It's interesting, and I think it's very important. But for me, the question, if you can elaborate more, is really the question, but how was it really possible to weak so much the whole legalization institutions? That is for me the important question, because finally I think you have given a good contribution really for the reflection of the partners not in Mozambique, and the defense was mostly looking at the partners in Mozambique. So for me, your critique to the institution and the actors in the institution, such as the international institution as well as the private banks, and the question about how is it possible to have this legal corruption or this legal situation of exploiting in a way that we cannot accept. So the institutional side for me is interesting to look at in Mozambique and at the international and at the Swiss level.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I mean, really all three questions are the same. And I mean, first of all, I did start out by saying I think it's our responsibility as outsiders to deal with our agencies. And I think it's for the Mozambicans to deal with the Mozambicans who are involved in this. So I haven't gone into a lot of detail on the Mozambican side of this, and won't now. But I think your question, how is this possible, is exactly the point. Because one of the things that I said after Jürgen's talk was that it wouldn't be possible in domestic lending. We have laws that in domestic lending will prevent this from happening. Yet we allow our institutions to do this internationally. So I haven't looked at Swiss law in recent, I mean, I was on Jubilee 2000 20 years ago and looked at a lot of this at the time. But at least in British law, British banks would be responsible if they made this kind of outrageous loan to a poor person in Britain. And we've had a lot of crackdowns on what are called payday lenders and so on, although, yeah, okay, there are issues. But even the British Parliament feels that it needs to control the lenders to poor people in Britain. The British Parliament, the Swiss Parliament do not feel they need to control lenders to developing countries. So that's the first problem. That's the institutional problem, is that these people, these huge transnational corporations, Credit Suisse is a major global corporation, is totally uncontrolled in what it does in lending to poor people, lending to poor countries. Now, what has changed, and this is the organizational question, when we were doing Jubilee 2000 20 years ago, lending was largely by the banks themselves. The nature of lending has changed, and we are now switching in which the banks don't lend at all. The banks make their money by facilitating others to lend. So what happens is that because we have these huge pension and investment funds, they have to put their money somewhere. Now, if we accept the present pension system, which most of us do, I'm getting pension money from people that are invested in, okay. These people have to invest somewhere. So Credit Suisse becomes part of the process that facilitates those investments, for good or bad. So what happens is that Credit Suisse has a set of clients, huge pension funds, and they're dealing with bonds and loans and syndicated loans all the time. And so they get on the phone, their salesmen get on the phone, Andrew Pierce and others get on the phone, and they say, okay, we have an $800 million bond, government guaranteed from Mozambique, would you like $50 million of this? And the Harvard Pension Fund or whoever, Franklin Templeton, will say, yes, we'll take it. And everybody says they have done due diligence. Very few people do. Now what was interesting about the Mozambican loan is that a number of people did do a kind of very basic due diligence and didn't take the loan. So that a number of people who were offered the bond by Credit Suisse, who would normally have taken bonds from Credit Suisse or syndicated loans from Credit Suisse, did a very basic due diligence and said no. And I know people who have done the who were phoned by Credit Suisse or phoned by bondholders, and they said on the telephone, don't touch this with a barge pole. Don't go near it. This is a bad loan. And Credit Suisse actually had trouble flogging the loans because enough people checked. The reason they had to go through the Eurobond was they couldn't sell the syndicated loan. The reason they went to VTB was they couldn't sell the syndicated loan because enough people looked and saw it was unacceptable. So what you have is a bank that is mediating huge investments, most of which would be reasonable, but in which they're working on commissions, they're trying to build up their portfolio, and so they're selling also dubious loans. And I think Credit Suisse is now being investigated in the United States, both by the financial authorities and the FBI, investigated by the British Financial Conduct Authority for misconduct in the way they sold these loans. But the point is that, except at that very extreme level, they are not controlled. Now, the campaigning point, it seems to me, for us, if we want to control our agencies, let me make one other point. However corrupt Gubuza was, he couldn't have done this without Credit Suisse. It would have been impossible. He could not have arranged this himself. So, whatever we think about a corrupt Mozambican elite, they couldn't have done this themselves. Credit Suisse did it. We have to hold Credit Suisse to account, and if we don't hold Credit Suisse to account, just as I've said in here, the donors have spent 30 years giving Mozambicans a license to kill and steal. If Credit Suisse is not held to account, then it too has a license to steal. And I think it's time that we have to say, okay, at international lending, that's unreasonable.
Mm-hmm. And we still don't have an investigation by Swiss authorities. Yes, maybe we are a little bit over time already, so if you can please be...
You mentioned Andrew Pierce in your presentation. He was the one who was at the center of negotiating the deal, and shortly before it was concluded he moved away to Privinvest, the company who then got the full 2 billion. And it's always mentioned and it's always said there is nothing wrong about it, but I wonder whether this couldn't be investigated further, because that company was established in Zurich, Palomar. They also received some 30 million for their services, which is, compared to the 2 billion, not so much, but for financial services, 31 million is a nice sum. And to me that's so, I find it, I cannot find words for things like that to be written in our papers and it's not taken up and it's accepted. And the other thing is the 200 million that Credit Suisse took for fees and that's without the interest to be paid back by Mozambique.
Just one very short footnote, only in case you haven't long since seen this, that I think a month ago Credit Suisse launched a major banking transparency initiative, obviously driven by the bad fate that it has suffered in this case. They floated it through the Institute of International Finance, which is something like the overarching body of international money center banks, and they have even approached our European network as NGOs in order to give the whole initiative more credibility. And for us this is indeed a dilemma, because the initiative is totally voluntary, so they try to establish something like a voluntary credit register for money center banks, and then they want to come up with a kind of committee that oversees this. And we or our colleagues in the European network need to make a decision whether we want to be part of this. This is just PR, or is it one of the opportunities to work towards more transparency, better control of these whole mechanisms?
Okay, let me make two comments on that, both global. One is that Andrew Pierce has very expensive and aggressive lawyers. And you'll notice that I have been very careful of what I have said. I haven't said some of the things that you've said. And as the journalists in the room will know, we have to be very careful what we say. This is an issue in all of us who are writing about this, who are doing investigations about this. We all get, I mean, through this whole debt stuff, I've got a huge file of lawyers' letters. They are trying to control, of course, what we say. And they do say that there's nothing that Andrew Pierce did which was improper, or immoral, illegal. And I'm not going to comment on whether it was or not. But the power is always on their side in this sort of thing. And the PR power, and this takes me back to the whole Credit Suisse thing. What Credit Suisse, under its relatively new CEO, is trying to do is to say, we are now the good guys, we are cleaning up our act. What happened in Mozambique was under the previous administration, has nothing to do with us. What they have done with the original proposal, which they are circulating, is watered it down to the point where it would be totally useless. And they're hoping to publish this as an agreement that everybody agrees to, which is totally useless. And I think it is actually important that civil society say, no, we're not going to be part of this. That we want you first to take responsibility for the sins of the past before you deal with the future. That you can't present a clean face now and say you're not responsible for what went on before, which is exactly what they're trying to do now. And I think that that's how they're going to, they'll get away with it. I think they will.
Let's not. Okay, I think we should conclude here. We are a little bit over time, and go over to the next speech. Thank you very much, Joe. Thank you very much.